My name is Madeline Walker, and at 33 years old, I found myself sandwiched between my 7-year-old niece and 9-year-old nephew at our family Thanksgiving table. I watched silently as my father raised his glass, toasting everyone around me one by one, their achievements celebrated while mine remained unmentioned. After years of this familiar invisibility, I decided this would be the last holiday I would endure. Just as I stood to announce my permanent departure from their lives, the doorbell rang. None of us could have imagined how the stranger at the door, clutching a faded photograph and a yellowed letter, would shatter 33 years of carefully constructed family fiction. Before I tell you how this stranger changed everything, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and subscribe if you have ever felt invisible in your own family. That morning, I had woken up early, determined to make this Thanksgiving different. The aroma of cinnamon and apples filled my small apartment as I carefully followed my grandmother Eleanor's handwritten recipe for her famous apple pie. I had spent extra time weaving the lattice top, making sure each strip of dough was perfectly placed. This pie represented more than just dessert. It was my offering, my attempt to be seen. My life was modest, but meaningful. I taught art at Westlake Elementary School, helping children discover their creative voices, something I had struggled to find in my own childhood. My apartment was small but filled with canvases, both blank and painted, and my loyal companion, a gray tabby cat named Jasper who often left paw prints across my works in progress. I had named him after the stone for its ability to absorb negative energy, something I needed in my life. But this year felt different. After 10 years of submitting my work to galleries, the prestigious Anderson Gallery had finally accepted 3 of my landscape paintings for their winter exhibition. This wasn't just a personal milestone. It was validation that my choice to pursue art rather than the business degree my father Walter had pushed for wasn't a mistake. I imagined his face when I shared the news, hoping to finally see pride replace the perpetual disappointment that had characterized his expression whenever we discussed my career. I arrived at my parents' suburban colonial home at precisely 2 o'clock, balancing the carefully wrapped pie in one hand and a gift bag containing 2 bottles of wine in the other. The house looked perfect as always, with my mother Grace's immaculate decorating bringing Martha Stewart to mind. Fall wreaths, strategically placed pumpkins, and a professionally printed "Give Thanks" banner created the impression of familial warmth that rarely existed beyond the decor. "Madeline, you made it," my mother said, offering a quick, perfunctory hug before immediately turning back to her kitchen tasks. "Just put the pie with the other desserts. Your brother Ethan and Amanda are already here with the kids." I placed my pie among the store-bought desserts, noticing how my handmade offering seemed out of place among the perfect, professionally decorated cakes and tarts. Like me in this family, I thought, before pushing the comparison away. Minutes later, the front door opened again as my younger sister Heather made her entrance, her hand conspicuously extended to display her recent engagement ring. Her fiancé Jason, a cardiovascular surgeon from what my mother always emphasized was a good family, followed behind carrying an expensive bottle of champagne. "Look who finally got a ring!" my mother exclaimed, rushing to embrace Heather while admiring the substantial diamond. "We have so much to celebrate this year." I offered to help in the kitchen, but my offers were politely declined or redirected to simpler tasks like filling water glasses. My mother and aunts had their system, and my assistants, like my presence, seemed more inconvenience than help. As I arranged napkins into fan shapes the way my mother preferred, I remembered my childhood and the Thanksgiving tradition I both loved and dreaded. My father would go around the table, raising his glass to each of his children, praising their yearly achievements. Ethan's sports trophies and academic honors, Heather's social successes and beauty pageant wins, and then me, usually with something generic about trying hard or being creative. His tone making creativity sound like a consolation prize for not excelling at something worthwhile. This year would be different, I told myself. I had real, tangible success to share. The Anderson Gallery was renowned in the art world, and having work displayed there was no small achievement. Perhaps this would be the year I would finally earn the same proud smile my siblings received so effortlessly. As relatives arrived, I helped take coats and directed everyone to the appetizer table. Uncle Frank patted my shoulder absent-mindedly while asking where my successful brother was. Aunt Sylvia kissed my cheek before immediately asking about Heather and her doctor fiancé. My cousins waved hello before gravitating toward my siblings. I remained in motion, helping, smiling, waiting for someone to ask about my life, my work, my achievements. The questions never came. Still, I held on to hope. The dinner was when announcements were made, achievements acknowledged. The dinner was when I would finally claim my place at this family table. When it came time to be seated for dinner, I searched for my name card among the elaborate table settings. I found it placed between my niece Emma and nephew Lucas, away from the main adult conversation. My mother had arranged the seating with married couples together, singles distributed among the children. As the only unmarried adult who wasn't a college student, I occupied that ambiguous space in family gatherings. No longer young enough to be fussed over, but not established enough in the traditional sense to be taken seriously. Everyone settled? Good, my father announced as he stood, wine glass in hand. His imposing figure commanded attention immediately. At 65, Walter Walker still maintained the authoritative presence that had built his successful accounting firm. Another year has passed, and we have much to be thankful for. He turned first to my brother, to Ethan, who made partner at Jackson and Meyer Law this year. Your mother and I couldn't be prouder of how you've built your career and your beautiful family. Ethan nodded appreciatively, accepting the praise as his due. At 31, he had followed the path our father had laid out perfectly, excelling at every milestone, collecting achievements like trophies. To Heather, my father continued, his smile broadening, who not only excels at her marketing career, but has found a wonderful man in Jason. Your engagement is the highlight of our year. Heather beamed, squeezing Jason's hand as they accepted the toast. At 29, she had always been the family darling, her charisma and conventional beauty making her everyone's favorite. One by one, my father acknowledged each family member. Uncle Frank for his retirement, Aunt Cynthia for her volunteer work, Cousin Brian for graduating college, Cousin Alicia for her new job. Even the children received personalized recognition for school achievements and sports victories. I sat straight in my chair, smiling and clapping for each toast, while internally rehearsing how I would describe the gallery exhibition. I waited for my father to turn to me, to acknowledge my existence, my year, my achievement. But after toasting my youngest cousin's soccer championship, my father simply raised his glass in a general direction and said, "And to all of us gathered here, Happy Thanksgiving. Let's eat." The moment had passed. I had been grouped into the generic all of us, my individual accomplishments not deemed worthy of specific mention. I felt my carefully constructed smile falter for just a moment before I reinforced it. No one noticed. As the turkey was carved and sides were passed, I attempted to steer the conversation toward my news. I actually have some exciting news about my artwork, I began. Before I could continue, Aunt Cynthia loudly interrupted. Did everyone hear that Alicia's company is sending her to Paris for a training program? 6 weeks in Paris, can you imagine? The conversation immediately shifted to Alicia's opportunity. Travel recommendations and reminiscences of others' European adventures. My news evaporated into the air, unheard and unacknowledged. I was suddenly transported back to my high school graduation, standing in the backyard in my cap and gown, trying to tell my parents about the art scholarship I had received. In the middle of my sentence, Ethan had arrived with news of being accepted to law school, and my parents had rushed to congratulate him, leaving me mid-sentence, my news forever unheard. My reverie was broken by a cold sensation spreading across my lap. Lucas had knocked over his cup, sending juice across the tablecloth and onto my cream-colored dress. I gasped at the sudden coldness and reached for napkins. "It's fine," I said automatically as Lucas looked guilty. "No harm done." I dabbed at the spreading stain, but no one else seemed to notice the minor catastrophe. My mother was engaged in conversation with Heather about wedding venues, and my father was discussing politics with Uncle Frank. "I'll just clean up in the bathroom," I said to no one in particular as I excused myself from the table. No one acknowledged my departure. In the quiet sanctuary of the powder room, I stared at my reflection as I blotted the stain. The woman looking back at me seemed familiar yet foreign. I practiced my smile, the one I had perfected over years of family gatherings. The one that masked the hurt of being perpetually overlooked. What was wrong with me that made me so easy to ignore? Was I too quiet? Not accomplished enough? Not conventionally successful like my siblings? When I returned to the table, the conversation had shifted entirely. My father was telling the story of Ethan's first court case, a story the family had heard at least a dozen times. I slipped back into my seat between the children, who were now playing a game on a tablet, completely disconnected from the adult conversation. As dessert was served, my mother presented the array of pies and cakes. The pumpkin pie is from Henderson's Bakery, the chocolate cake is from Aunt Cynthia, and the pecan pie is from Cousin Alice, she announced. "And the apple pie?" Uncle Frank asked as he eyed the dessert table. "Oh, that one too," my mother said dismissively, forgetting entirely that I had made it. I sat silently as everyone praised the apple pie, commenting on the perfect crust and ideal balance of spices. No one knew it was mine, and something stopped me from claiming it. Perhaps it was the realization sinking in, heavy and cold in my stomach, that my invisibility in this family wasn't coincidental or temporary. It was a pattern, so deeply established that even my contributions were assumed to come from elsewhere. As I watched my family enjoy the pie I had spent hours perfecting, memories flooded back, creating a montage of oversight and dismissal that had shaped my life. I was 8 years old, sitting at the piano for my first recital. I had practiced for weeks, my small fingers learning to dance across the keys to play for Elise. I looked out at the audience, searching for my parents' faces, only to find their seats empty. I learned later that they had left early to make it to Ethan's baseball game across town. At 14, I won first place in a regional art contest. When I showed my father the blue ribbon and certificate, he had patted my head and said, "That's nice, sweetie. It's good to have hobbies." The ribbon went into a drawer while Ethan's sports trophies occupied an entire shelf in the living room display case. At my college graduation, I looked for my family in the crowd after receiving my fine arts degree. I found them eventually, huddled in conversation with Heather's new boyfriend, more interested in her relationship than my academic achievement. My diploma joined the blue ribbon in the drawer. The weight of these memories pressed down on me as my mother announced it was time for family photos. We gathered in the living room where my father's prized collection of family portraits hung. The photographer, a cousin's husband, arranged us carefully. My mother and father seated in the center, Ethan and his family to their right, Heather and Jason to their left. I was positioned at the edge, easily cropped out if the frame needed adjustment. "Smile, everyone," the photographer called out. I complied automatically, the muscles in my face performing their well-rehearsed function. Click. Another family moment captured, another visual representation of my peripheral status. As we dispersed from the photo session, Uncle Frank approached me, drink in hand. "So, Madeline, still just teaching art? Ever think about getting into something more substantial? Administration, maybe?" Before I could respond with the news about my gallery exhibition, he continued, "Ethan was telling me about some investment opportunities. You should talk to him. Need to think about your future." You know, my future. As if teaching art and creating it were merely placeholders until I found something substantial. As if my passion and purpose were somehow less valid than my siblings' chosen paths. In the family room, my mother was showing relatives' old photo albums. I drifted over, peering over shoulders to see images of family vacations, holidays, and milestones. I noticed a pattern I had never consciously registered before: Photo after photo centered on Ethan and Heather, with me often at the margins, sometimes partially out of frame or looking away from the camera. "Look at Heather in her first pageant dress," my mother cooed, pointing to a portrait of my sister at age 7. "And here's Ethan scoring the winning touchdown in the state championship." I waited for a photo featuring me, my art, my moments. They were few and far between, and when they did appear, they passed without comment. Later, as I helped clear dishes in the kitchen, I overheard my mother talking to our neighbor who had stopped by briefly. "Ethan was our firstborn," she was saying proudly. "Always knew he was destined for greatness." I froze, dish towel in hand. Ethan was not the firstborn. I was. I had arrived 2 years before him. Had my mother actually forgotten this fact? Or had she revised the family history in her mind to place Ethan at the beginning of their parental journey? During a quiet moment, I wandered into my father's study, a room that had always intimidated me as a child. The walls were adorned with his accomplishments and those of my siblings. Ethan's law degree hung in an ornate frame. Heather's marketing awards were displayed prominently on a shelf. I opened the bottom drawer of his desk, knowing what I would find: my art school diploma in its original mailing tube, never framed, never displayed. By the time dessert was served, the pattern of the day had become unbearably clear. More toasts were made. Ethan's children were praised for their grades and sports prowess. Heather was congratulated again on her engagement. Work achievements, health improvements, and even new car purchases all received recognition. I gathered my courage during a brief lull. "I have some news too," I said, my voice sounding smaller than intended. "The Anderson Gallery has accepted 3 of my paintings for their winter exhibition. It opens next month." My announcement hung in the air for a brief moment before my cousin Samantha excitedly interrupted. "Speaking of news, Brad and I are expecting. Baby due in June." The table erupted in excited congratulations. Questions about due dates, gender reveal plans, and nursery themes flew across the table. My news about the gallery evaporated as if it had never been spoken. I watched as my mother hugged Samantha, tears in her eyes. Another grandbaby in the family. What wonderful news. The contrast was stark. My professional achievement, one I had worked toward for a decade, couldn't compete with the biological milestone of reproduction. I sat quietly, finishing my pie, wondering what I would need to accomplish to earn the same enthusiastic response. Perhaps nothing would ever be enough. As I helped gather dessert plates, I realized that I had spent my entire life trying to earn a place in this family through achievements, accolades, and accomplishments. I had believed that if I could just find the right success, they would finally see me. But the truth was becoming painfully clear. No external validation would change how they saw me, because the issue wasn't what I had or hadn't achieved. The issue lay elsewhere, in some unspoken family dynamic I couldn't identify, but could feel in every interaction, every oversight, every moment of being looked through rather than at. After dessert, the family scattered throughout the house. I found myself standing on the periphery of the living room where my father, Ethan, and several uncles were discussing the family's traditional Christmas vacation. "We've booked the same ski lodge in Aspen," my father was saying. "Got the usual 3 cabins for all of us." My ears perked up. I hadn't heard anything about Christmas plans, let alone been invited to join. "Will there be enough room with Jason joining us now?" Uncle Frank asked. "Oh, we factored that in," my father replied. "Heather and Jason will have the guest suite in our cabin." I waited for some mention of arrangements for me, but the conversation shifted to ski rentals and lift tickets. It was clear that I wasn't part of the mental calculation, wasn't factored into the all of us that my father had referenced. I drifted away from the conversation, moving toward the kitchen where my mother was talking with Aunt Sylvia. I paused in the hallway when I heard my name. "What about Madeline? Is she joining the Christmas trip?" Aunt Sylvia asked. "Oh," my mother replied, her voice lowered but still audible. "We don't really factor Madeline into family plans much anymore. She usually has her own thing going on, and frankly, It's easier without having to accommodate someone who doesn't quite fit with the group dynamic. Her words landed like a physical blow. I leaned against the wall, trying to process what I'd just heard. Didn't fit with the group dynamic? I was their daughter, their sister. How could I not fit? Needing space to think, I climbed the stairs to the second floor, finding myself drawn to the attic access. The attic had been my refuge as a child, a quiet place where I could draw and dream away from the noise of a family that often felt like it was moving at a different pace than mine. The pull-down stairs creaked as I ascended into the dusty space. Afternoon light filtered through the small window, illuminating stacked boxes and forgotten furniture. I moved toward a section I knew contained items from my childhood, opening a cardboard box labeled Madeline Early Years. Inside were the expected items: baby clothes, first shoes, a few toys. But beneath these mementos, I found something unexpected, a pamphlet on adoption, dated the year before my birth. I stared at it, confused. Had my parents considered adopting before I was born? Or was there something more significant about this discovery? I continued looking through the box, finding birth certificates for Ethan and Heather, but not my own. Strange comments from relatives throughout my life suddenly replayed in my mind with new significance. Great-Aunt Martha remarking that I looked different from my siblings. Grandfather Joseph asking my mother where Madeline got her artistic talent, since no one in the family had it. The awkward silence that once followed when a distant relative asked who I resembled in the family. I returned to the Thanksgiving gathering with new questions swirling in my mind. In the living room, an argument had broken out between my cousins about politics. As the debate heated up, I noticed Ethan defending our parents' traditional viewpoints. "That's just how things are in this family," he stated firmly. "We respect the established order." His words, though about politics, struck me as applicable to the family hierarchy itself. The established order placed him and Heather at the center, with me perpetually orbiting the periphery. And everyone, including me, had accepted this as just how things are. But what if there was a deeper reason for my outsider status? What if my lifelong feeling of being different wasn't just in my head? I found my mother in the kitchen, cleaning up alone. The perfect opportunity. "Mom, can I ask you something?" I began, keeping my voice even. "Of course, dear, but make it quick. I need to get these dishes done before everyone wants coffee." She didn't look up from the sink. I've always felt different in this family. Treated differently. Is there something I should know about why that is? My mother's hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their scrubbing. "Don't be so sensitive, Madeline. No one treats you differently. You've always had a tendency to exaggerate things." Her dismissal was familiar, but this time, it felt like confirmation rather than denial. I pressed further. "I found adoption pamphlets in the attic, in a box with my baby things." The plate in my mother's hand slipped, clattering loudly in the sink but not breaking. "You shouldn't be going through old boxes," she said, her voice tight. "Those were probably just information materials. I collected all sorts of parenting resources back then." Her explanation seemed plausible, but her reaction told a different story. I decided to approach my father, finding him in the hallway heading toward his study. "Dad, do you have a minute to talk?" I asked. He checked his watch. "Can it wait, Madeline? The game is about to start, and everyone's gathering in the den. It's important. I have some questions about my childhood." His expression shifted subtly, discomfort replacing impatience. "This isn't the time for a trip down memory lane. We have guests. We always have guests or work or something else that makes it not the right time," I said, my frustration breaking through. "I just want to understand why I've always felt like an outsider in this family." My father's face hardened. "That's your perception, not reality. Now, if you'll excuse me." He brushed past me, effectively ending the conversation. Later, while helping arrange photo albums that had been looked through earlier, I noticed something I hadn't before, a suspicious gap in the family documentation. Photos of my mother pregnant with Ethan and Heather, but none with me. Hospital photos of their births, but none of mine. It might have been nothing, but combined with everything else, It felt like another piece of a puzzle I was just beginning to see. The final straw came as family members prepared to leave. I overheard my grandmother telling Heather she wanted her to have the family heirloom pearl necklace for her wedding. It should go to the first daughter to marry, she said warmly. But I was the first daughter. Even if I wasn't married, the family tradition had always been that the oldest daughter received the pearls. Another rule changed, another tradition bent to exclude me. Standing in the entryway, watching relatives don coats and exchange goodbyes, I made my decision. This would be my last Walker family gathering. Whatever the reason for my perpetual outsider status, I no longer had the emotional energy to keep seeking acceptance from people who, for 33 years, had shown me I wasn't truly part of their circle. I gathered my purse, mentally rehearsing a goodbye speech. Not dramatic, not accusatory, just a simple declaration of my need to remove myself from this painful dynamic. I would wish them well and walk away, preserving what dignity I had left. The family had gathered in the living room for after-dinner coffee. I stood, clearing my throat to get their attention. My heart pounded in my chest. But my resolve was firm. Everyone, I'd like to say something, I began. The doorbell rang, cutting through my words before anyone had even turned to acknowledge me. My father frowned, checking his watch. Who could that be? Everyone's already here, he muttered, annoyed at the interruption. I'll get it, my mother said, setting down her coffee cup and smoothing her dress as she moved toward the front door. I remained standing, my prepared speech stuck in my throat. The family's attention had shifted completely to the unexpected arrival, curious murmurs replacing the previous conversations. From the entryway came the sound of my mother's surprised gasp, followed by tense, hushed words I couldn't make out. Then silence. Grace? Who is it? My father called out when my mother didn't return. Instead of answering, my mother reappeared in the living room doorway, her face drained of color. Behind her stood an elderly man I had never seen before. He appeared to be in his 70s, with silver hair and familiar hazel eyes that widened when they landed on me. My God, he whispered. You look just like her. The living room fell silent as every head turned from the stranger to me and back again. My mother's hands trembled as she clutched the doorframe for support. Walter. My mother addressed my father, her voice barely audible. This is Douglas Mercer. My father's reaction was immediate and visceral. He stood abruptly, knocking his coffee cup over. The dark liquid spread across the beige carpet, but no one moved to clean it. What are you doing here? My father demanded, his face flushing with what appeared to be both anger and fear. The elderly man, Douglas, held a worn manila envelope in his hands. His eyes hadn't left my face since he entered the room. I didn't know, he said, though it wasn't clear who he was addressing. All these years, I didn't know. Know what? I found myself asking, stepping forward. Who are you? Douglas shifted his gaze to my mother. Grace, it's been 34 years. Don't you think it's time? My mother's coffee cup slipped from her hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. No one flinched at the sound. You need to leave, she whispered. This is a family gathering. That's why I'm here, Douglas replied firmly. He turned to me again. My name is Douglas Mercer. I knew your mother 34 years ago. The math wasn't lost on me. 34 years ago, I would have been in utero. I felt a strange buzzing in my ears as pieces began to click into place. Mom? I turned to my mother, whose face had crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. My father stepped forward, physically placing himself between Douglas and the rest of the family. Whatever you think you're doing here, it's not welcome. These are private family matters. Walter, Douglas addressed my father directly. I understand your position. I do. But I only recently found out myself, and she deserves to know. Know what? Ethan interjected, standing now too. What's going on? The Thanksgiving gathering had descended into chaos. Relatives exchanged confused glances. Children were ushered out of the room by alert aunts, and my grandmother pressed a hand to her chest, looking faint. Douglas reached into the manila envelope and withdrew a weathered photograph. He held it out, not to my father or mother, but directly to me. I stepped forward and took it with trembling hands. The photo showed a much younger version of my mother, her hair long and flowing, smiling brightly into the camera. Beside her, with his arm wrapped around her waist, stood a young Douglas Mercer. They were clearly a couple, their body language intimate and familiar. "Your mother and I were together before she met Walter," Douglas explained quietly. "I was drafted and sent to Vietnam shortly after this was taken. We wrote letters for a while. And then they stopped coming." My mother had sunk into an armchair, her face buried in her hands. My father stood rigid, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching. When I returned stateside a year later, I learned Grace had married Walter. Douglas continued. "I respected that and stayed away. I built a life elsewhere, never knowing." "Never knowing what?" I pressed, though I was beginning to understand with terrifying clarity. Douglas reached into the envelope once more and withdrew a sealed letter, yellowed with age. It was addressed simply, "To my daughter." "I found this among my late mother's possessions last month," Douglas explained. She had kept correspondence from Grace that I never knew about, including the news that Grace was expecting my child when I was overseas. The room spun around me. I gripped the letter, staring at the handwriting that was undeniably my mother's. "Is this true?" I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. I turned to my parents. "Am I not your daughter?" I directed the question specifically to my father. The silence that followed was answer enough. With shaking hands, I opened the letter, unfolding the delicate paper carefully. The first lines leapt out at me, "To my daughter who I may never have the courage to tell the truth. Your father is not the man who raised you, but a man named Douglas Mercer who never knew you existed." The living room had become eerily silent as I read the letter aloud, each word reshaping my understanding of my existence. My mother's handwriting revealed the story I had never known. I discovered I was pregnant shortly after Douglas was deployed to Vietnam. Terrified and alone, I reconnected with Walter, who had always shown interest in me. When he proposed, I accepted, believing it was the best option for security. Walter agreed to raise the child as his own with the condition that no one, including you, would ever know the truth. I looked up from the letter to find my mother openly weeping now, no longer attempting to hide her distress. My father, or rather Walter, stood with his arms crossed, his expression a complex mixture of anger and what I now recognized as the resentment that had colored our relationship my entire life. "Is this why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Is this why I was always treated differently? Always on the outside looking in?" My mother nodded, finally meeting my eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "It was supposed to be our secret forever. No one else knew except Walter and me." "And grandmother," Douglas added quietly. "Apparently Grace confided in her before she passed." Ethan stepped forward, his lawyer's composure momentarily abandoned. "Wait, are you saying Madeline is our half-sister? That Dad isn't her biological father?" Heather had moved to sit beside our mother, her hand on her shoulder. "Mom, how could you keep this from all of us?" "From Madeline?" "It was the agreement," my father stated flatly. "When I married your mother, I agreed to give her child my name, but there were conditions. The child would never know, and we would never speak of it. It was a different time. These things weren't discussed openly like they are now." "Things like me, you mean," I said, my voice finding strength in the anger now surging through me. "I wasn't a thing to be hidden away. I was a child." "Your child, Mom. Didn't you think I deserved to know why I was always treated as less than?" "We never meant to treat you differently," my mother protested weakly. "But you did," I countered. Every day of my life, I felt it. Every achievement overlooked, every milestone minimized. You pushed me to the periphery of this family and made me believe it was my fault, that I wasn't good enough. I turned to Walter. "And you? You resented me from the beginning, didn't you? Every time you looked at me, you saw another man. But I was just a child who wanted her father's approval." Walter's rigid posture didn't change, but something in his eyes did. It's not that simple, Madeline. I tried. But yes, sometimes when I looked at you, especially as you grew to resemble him, he nodded toward Douglas. It was a reminder of something I wanted to forget. The extended family had divided into groups. Some huddled in shocked conversation, others offering uncomfortable support to my mother. A few, like Uncle Frank, seemed almost vindicated, as if a long-held suspicion had been confirmed. I understand now, said Aunt Cynthia, breaking the tension. I always wondered why Madeline looked so different from Ethan and Heather. Those distinctive hazel eyes, the artistic talent. Did everyone suspect except me? I asked, looking around the room. Not suspect, exactly, my grandmother interjected, speaking for the first time. But families notice things, dear. The way Walter was always more distant with you, the way your mother sometimes looked at you with guilt. We just never spoke of it. Douglas stepped forward cautiously. I want you to know, Madeline, that I had no idea you existed until last month. If I had known Grace was carrying my child, I would never have stayed away, regardless of her marriage. How can I believe that? I asked, though without hostility. You're a stranger to me. A fair question, he acknowledged. All I can offer is the truth now. After finding your mother's letters, I spent weeks tracking down where you all might be. I have no expectations, but I thought you deserved to know about your biological heritage, if nothing else. Medical history. He added practically. My family has a history of early-onset arthritis, which might explain the joint pain you mentioned in your letter, Grace. And the artistic talent, Madeline. My mother was a painter, and I dabbled in sculpture most of my life. The practical information was strangely grounding amid the emotional chaos. My unexplained joint pain and artistic inclinations suddenly had context, a genetic framework that had been missing. I just don't understand, I said, turning back to my parents. If this was supposed to be a secret from everyone, why treat me differently at all? Why not commit fully to the fiction that I was your daughter in every way? I directed this specifically to Walter. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances before my mother spoke. We tried, especially at first. But I couldn't help it, Walter admitted, his voice surprisingly vulnerable. I told myself I would treat you the same as my biological children, but it was harder than I expected. The human heart isn't always rational, Madeline. And I was complicit, my mother added. Every time Walter showed preference to Ethan or Heather, I compensated by giving them extra attention too, afraid that showing you special care would somehow reveal our secret. It was wrong. And cowardly. Ethan approached me, confusion evident on his face. All these years, I never questioned why Dad favored me. I just assumed it was because I followed his path, did what he wanted. And I never noticed at all, Heather admitted, shame coloring her voice. I was so wrapped up in my own life, enjoying being the favorite daughter. I'm sorry, Madeline. The family secret had broken open completely now, exposing decades of subtle inequities and unspoken tensions. Relatives were processing the revelation in various ways, some offering sympathy, others appearing judgmental of my parents' deception, a few simply stunned into silence. What happens now? I asked, looking between the three adults who represented different facets of my parentage. The mother who had carried me but hidden my true identity, the man who had raised me with resentment rather than love, and the biological father who had never known I existed. That's entirely up to you, Douglas said gently. I've come to offer information, not to disrupt your life. Though I would welcome the chance to know you if you're open to it. I looked at the letter in my hands, then at the photograph showing my mother and Douglas in a moment of happiness before war and secrets tore them apart. In that image, I saw my own features reflected back at me, the shape of my eyes, the curve of my smile, the artistic soul that had never made sense in the Walker family context. I'd like to hear more about you. I told Douglas. About your life, your family, my biological heritage. The words felt strange on my tongue, but also right somehow. I turned to my mother and Walter. As for us, I need time. 33 years of feeling like an outsider doesn't disappear with one revelation. I have a lot to process. My mother nodded tearfully. We understand. Whatever you need. Walter remained silent, his expression unreadable. Our relationship had always been the most strained, and this revelation had merely provided context for decades of emotional distance. The Thanksgiving gathering had been irrevocably transformed. What had begun as another holiday of quiet invisibility had become the moment when everything hidden was finally brought to light. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its envelope. I think I'd like to leave with Douglas, if that's all right, I said, making my decision. I have questions only he can answer. No one protested as I gathered my coat and purse. The family watched in silence as I prepared to depart with the stranger who shared my blood, my artistic inclinations, my hazel eyes. At the door, I paused and looked back at the family that had both raised and rejected me in subtle ways throughout my life. I'll be in touch, I said, not knowing yet what form that contact would take or when I would be ready for it. As Douglas and I stepped out into the crisp November evening, I felt a strange combination of grief and liberation. The family narrative I had accepted all my life had been shattered, but in its place was the possibility of a new understanding, not just of my family, but of myself. 3 months after that life-altering Thanksgiving, I sat in my therapist's office, describing the latest developments in what she had dubbed my identity journey. I've been seeing Douglas weekly, I explained. It's strange building a relationship with your biological father in your 30s, but also wonderful in unexpected ways. Dr. Linda nodded encouragingly. What's been most significant about getting to know him? I considered the question carefully. Finding the missing pieces of myself. Douglas showed me photos of his mother. My grandmother I never knew. She painted landscapes, just like I do, with the same attention to light and shadow. He took me to his workshop where he creates these incredible wood sculptures. Watching his hands work the wood, I recognized my own gestures, my own approach to materials. The discovery of my artistic heritage had been profoundly validating. What Walter had dismissed as a hobby, what my mother had treated as an inexplicable quirk, was actually a genetic inheritance flowing through generations I hadn't known existed. Beyond the artistic connection, Douglas had provided crucial medical information. My unexplained joint pain had been diagnosed as the early stages of the same arthritis that had affected his family for generations. With proper treatment started early, my prognosis was excellent. And your relationship with Grace and Walter? Dr. Linda prompted. Complicated, I admitted. Mom calls every few days. We've had some difficult conversations about the choices she made. Why she never told me the truth even as an adult. She's trying though. She sent me old photos she had kept hidden of her pregnant with me. A few baby pictures that never made it into the family albums. Walter had been more distant, which wasn't surprising. We had met for coffee once. An awkward hour of halting conversation and long silences. He said something interesting though, I told Dr. Linda. He admitted that he had tried to love me as his own at first. But as I grew and began showing traits and talents so different from him, it became easier to focus on Ethan and Heather, who reflected qualities he recognized and valued. He said he was sorry. In his way, but that he didn't know how to bridge the gap now. My siblings had reached out individually in the weeks following Thanksgiving. Ethan had invited me to lunch, awkwardly but sincerely apologizing for never noticing or questioning the family dynamic that had marginalized me. I was so caught up in being the golden child that I never stopped to think about why he had confessed. That's no excuse, but I want you to know I see it now and I'm sorry. Heather had been more emotional, showing up at my apartment unannounced with tears and hugs. I always wanted to be closer to you, she had said. But there was this unspoken thing between us. This competitive energy I never understood. Now I realize it wasn't coming from us, but from them and their secret. Slowly, tentatively. We were forming new relationships based on truth rather than fiction, though the process was neither simple nor linear. The most significant change, however, had been internal. Understanding the root of my lifelong outsider status had freed me from decades of self-doubt and questioning. The problem had never been me, my achievements, or my worth. It had been a secret kept by others, a fiction maintained at my expense. The gallery opening in January had become a turning point in this new chapter of my life. Both my families had attended. Grace and Walter, tense but present, Ethan and Heather, supportive in ways they had never been before, and Douglas, proudly introducing himself to other attendees as Madeline's father. A phrase that still brought unexpected tears to my eyes. My landscapes had sold well, with the gallery owner requesting more work for a solo exhibition later in the year. My artistic identity, once relegated to the background of my family narrative, had moved to the center of my personal story. The most profound lesson, I told Dr. Linda as our session neared its end, has been realizing that family isn't just about blood or legal ties. It's about who sees you, truly sees you, and celebrates what they see. Douglas has known me for 3 months, but in some ways, he's seen me more clearly than the people who raised me ever did. As spring approached, we planned a new kind of family gathering at my apartment. Not a holiday with its prescribed traditions and expectations, but simply a dinner bringing together the complicated constellation of people who constituted my family now. Grace arrived first, bearing flowers and nervous energy. Walter came separately, still uncomfortable, but making an effort I would have thought impossible 6 months earlier. Ethan brought wine but left his family at home, wanting to focus on rebuilding our sibling bond. Heather arrived with dessert and genuine enthusiasm. And Douglas came last, carrying a small wooden box he had carved himself, containing art supplies selected with the knowledge of my preferences he had quickly developed. As we gathered around my table, I looked at these people who represented different facets of family. Biological connection, shared history, new beginnings, complicated love. The journey ahead would not be simple, but it would be authentic in a way my family relationships had never been before. When we raised our glasses for a toast, I spoke first, something that would have been unthinkable at that Thanksgiving table. To truth, I said simply, however painful, however long in coming, it has the power to heal even the oldest wounds. The healing wasn't complete, might never be fully complete. But understanding had replaced confusion, honesty had replaced fiction, and visibility had replaced the invisibility that had defined my place in the family for 33 years. 1 year later, I hosted Thanksgiving in my new home, a small house with a dedicated studio space filled with light. The table was set for both the family I was born into and the one I had chosen, Grace and Walter, still navigating their new reality. Ethan and Heather with their partners, Douglas and his wife from a later marriage, friends who had supported me through the transition. And even a man named Thomas I had been dating for several months, who saw me clearly and completely. The truth I had learned that Thanksgiving Day had shattered a lifetime of secrets. But from those fragments, something new and authentic had emerged. I had discovered that worth and belonging cannot be granted by others, but must be claimed from within. That family can be both born and made. That invisibility ends when you finally see yourself clearly, even if others do not. As I look back on that transformative year, I realize that sometimes the most painful revelations lead to the most profound growth. The secret that had constrained my life for 33 years had ultimately set me free to live authentically as myself, neither defined by others' perceptions nor limited by their expectations. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed how you understood yourself? Or have you felt invisible in your own family? Share your experience in the comments below. This journey has taught me the power of speaking our truths, and I'd love to hear yours. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. And thank you for being part of this healing journey with me.